April 7, 1945. East China Sea, 200 miles southwest of Kyushu. Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Matsuda stood on the bridge of the battleship Yamato, watching the horizon through salt-crusted binoculars as the first wave of American aircraft appeared like a swarm of metallic insects against the morning sky. He had been trained to believe this moment was impossible, that the Yamato, with her 18.1-inch guns and 16-inch armor plating, was an unsinkable fortress that would dominate any naval engagement. What he witnessed instead, over the next 2 hours and 23 minutes, would shatter every tactical assumption the Imperial Japanese Navy had built over 4 years of war. 386 American aircraft, more planes than he had seen in his entire naval career, descended upon his ship in coordinated waves. And they didn't miss. For the 2,767 officers and crew aboard the Yamato and her escort vessels on that fateful April morning, the collision between Japanese naval doctrine and American air superiority began the moment the first Grumman Helldivers appeared at 12:32 p.m. Among them were 276 crew members who had served on the Yamato since her commissioning in December 1941, men whose experiences would prove more devastating to Japanese naval mythology than any previous defeat. According to declassified records from the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, preserved in the National Archives at College Park, Maryland, the operational plan for sinking the Yamato, codenamed Operation Heaven No. 1 from the Japanese perspective, and simply the turkey shoot among American pilots, had been meticulously prepared based on lessons learned from 3 years of Pacific naval warfare. Naval intelligence officers had studied every engagement, every failed Japanese tactic, building a comprehensive understanding of how the Imperial Navy thought and fought. What actually happened that day caught the Japanese completely unprepared. Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito, commander of the Yamato Task Force, had written in his private log, now housed at the National Institute for Defense Studies in Tokyo, his assessment just days before the sortie, April 3, 1945. We sail tomorrow on what they are calling a one-way mission to Okinawa. High Command believes our sacrifice will inspire the homeland. But I have studied the Yamato's specifications for 3 years. Her armor can withstand any torpedo or bomb the Americans possess. Her anti-aircraft batteries can create an impenetrable wall of steel. If we can reach the landing beaches, we will inflict catastrophic damage on their invasion fleet. The Americans fear the Yamato, this much our intelligence confirms. They should. The psychological preparation Japanese naval officers received throughout their training had painted the Yamato in mythological terms. According to training documents recovered from the Japanese Naval Academy at Etajima after the war, catalogued as Allied Translation and Interrogation Section Report 347J, the battleship was described as the ultimate expression of Japanese naval supremacy, a vessel whose firepower and protection rendered her invulnerable to conventional attack. The manual, titled Tactical Employment of Super Battleships, Strategic Considerations, included detailed analysis of why the Yamato could not be sunk by air attack. Enemy aircraft bombs lack the penetrative power to breach main deck armor. Aerial torpedoes, while a nuisance, cannot deliver sufficient damage to vital areas due to our sophisticated compartmentalization and damage control systems. The ship would require sustained engagement with enemy battleship-caliber guns at close range to be threatened, a scenario our speed and maneuverability make unlikely. Yet here stood Lieutenant Commander Matsuda, age 32, a graduate of the Naval Academy's class of 1935, watching American dive bombers and torpedo planes coordinate their attacks with a precision that seemed almost choreographed. The cognitive dissonance wasn't merely uncomfortable, it was architecturally destabilizing to everything the Imperial Navy believed about modern warfare. Ensign Kazuo Watanabe, stationed in the starboard anti-aircraft director, described the first minutes of the attack in testimony given to American interrogators on April 9, 1945, and preserved in the U.S. Naval Historical Center archives. I counted the aircraft as they came in. We had been told to expect perhaps 50, maybe 75 planes maximum, the limit of what 1 or 2 American carriers could launch. I stopped counting at 150. They kept coming. Our anti-aircraft guns opened fire, and I waited for the American formation to break apart, to scatter and panic as our training films had shown. Instead, They maintained formation, adjusted their approach, and came in from 8 different vectors simultaneously. It was not chaos. It was orchestration. I realized in that moment that everything we had been taught about American air tactics was dangerously, fatally wrong. The training films Watanabe referenced had been standard propaganda fare shown to every Japanese naval officer since 1942. Captured footage from these films, preserved in the MacArthur Memorial Archives in Norfolk, Virginia, depicted American pilots as reckless individualists who broke formation at the first sign of anti-aircraft fire, whose aircraft were mechanically unreliable, whose tactics were predictable and crude. The reality approaching through the crystalline April sky bore no resemblance to these films. Commander Takeshi Nishimura, the Yamato's senior air defense coordinator, had positioned his gun crews based on assumptions drawn directly from these propaganda materials. His after-action report, written in the 40 minutes between the attack's end and the ship's final capsizing, was recovered from his body by rescue crews and later archived at the Japanese Defense Agency. The enemy formation demonstrated discipline I have never witnessed in actual combat. Our intelligence predicted they would attack from the east, taking advantage of sun position. Instead they attacked from northwest and southeast simultaneously, eliminating any sun advantage we might have used. Our intelligence predicted high-altitude bombing followed by disorganized torpedo runs. Instead they coordinated both attack types in overlapping waves that created impossible defensive choices. Every assumption we based our defense upon proved incorrect within the first 8 minutes of engagement. The first torpedo struck the Yamato's port side at 12:41 p.m., 9 minutes after the initial attack began. According to damage control logs recovered from surviving crew members and analyzed in the official U.S. Navy Report Action Report, sinking of Japanese battleship Yamato, April 7, 1945, this initial impact caused flooding in 3 compartments but was controlled within parameters the ship's designers had anticipated. What happened over the next 30 minutes revealed the tactical sophistication that Japanese naval planners had catastrophically underestimated. Commander Richard Blake, leading Bombing Squadron 17 from the USS Hornet, maintained a detailed combat diary that was later published in the Naval Institute Proceedings in 1947. His entry for April 7 describes the coordinated attack strategy. We had studied this target for weeks. The Yamato's anti-aircraft coverage had predictable gaps, areas where the geometry of her gun placements created dead zones. Our doctrine called for simultaneous attacks from opposing sides, forcing her damage control teams to split their response. Torpedo bombers would attack the same side in succession, each hit compounding flooding and list, making subsequent torpedoes more effective as the ship's angle increased. It wasn't bravery that would sink her. It was mathematics. The mathematics proved devastating. Between 12:41 p.m. and 1:15 p.m., the Yamato absorbed 7 torpedo hits and 6 bomb strikes. Damage control reports compiled by surviving officer Lieutenant Mitsuru Yoshida, published in his 1952 memoir Requiem for Battleship Yamato, reveal the cascading failures this coordinated assault created. First torpedo, port side amidships. Flooding controlled. Second torpedo, port side forward. Flooding controlled but ship developing slight list. Third torpedo, port side aft, near steering. List increasing to 5 degrees. Fourth torpedo, same area. List now 8 degrees. Counterflooding ordered to starboard compartments to maintain balance. Fifth torpedo, port side, forward of previous hits. List now 12 degrees despite counterflooding. Sixth torpedo, port side. List 17 degrees. Ship losing maneuverability. Seventh torpedo, port side amidships. List 20 degrees. Ship effectively dead in the water. Each bomb strike, meanwhile, targeted specific systems with precision that suggested detailed intelligence. One 1,000-pound bomb penetrated the forward anti-aircraft director, eliminating coordinated fire control for the port battery. Another struck near the base of the main tower, severing communication lines between the bridge and engineering spaces. A third penetrated the deck near the starboard secondary battery, starting fires that would eventually reach ammunition magazines. Lieutenant Yoshida's account continues with increasing desperation. By 1 p.m., we had lost communication with half our damage control teams. The list made movement through passageways nearly impossible. Men were climbing bulkheads rather than walking. Water rushing through torpedo holes created pressure that blew open watertight doors we had sealed. I watched Damage Control Officer Commander Jiro Nomura attempt to organize counterflooding, but each time we flooded starboard compartments to correct the list, another torpedo would strike port side, negating our efforts. It was like trying to bail out a boat while someone continually punched new holes in the hull. The tactical revelation went beyond mere numbers. What shattered Japanese naval confidence was the realization that American pilots had developed specific techniques to counter every defensive measure the Yamato possessed. Petty Officer Isamu Tanaka, a portside anti-aircraft gunner who survived by abandoning ship at 2:10 p.m., gave testimony to Japanese naval intelligence on April 14, 1945, now preserved in the records of the Imperial Japanese Navy at the National Institute for Defense Studies. The American aircraft attacked in a spiral pattern, dive bombers from high altitude drawing our anti-aircraft fire upward, while torpedo planes approached at wave-top level from the opposite side. When our guns concentrated on the torpedo planes, more dive bombers attacked. They were not taking turns. They were creating impossible defensive choices. Our gun crews were magnificent, shooting until ammunition ran out or guns jammed from overheating, but they were fighting a tactical problem with no solution. It was like trying to defend against rain by swatting individual raindrops. The Americans had learned from bitter experience. Early war carrier battles, Coral Sea, Midway, Eastern Solomons, had taught them that uncoordinated attacks against heavily defended targets produced catastrophic losses. By 1945, carrier doctrine had evolved into sophisticated strike packages where every element supported every other element. Fighters established air superiority. Dive bombers suppressed defenses. Torpedo bombers delivered killing blows. The result was force multiplication that overwhelmed even the most capable defenses. The material reality. The material superiority of American air power became undeniable through comparison. According to post-war analysis by the U.S. Naval Technical Mission to Japan, documented in Report S-01-1, Japanese Battleship Design and Construction, the Yamato carried 162 anti-aircraft guns of various calibers, the most comprehensive air defense suite ever installed on a battleship. These included 24 127mm dual-purpose guns, 162 25mm automatic cannons, and 4 13.2mm machine guns. The ship's designers had created overlapping fields of fire that theoretically could engage aircraft at any altitude and any approach vector. Training exercises had demonstrated the system's effectiveness against simulated attacks. On paper, the Yamato's air defense was formidable. On April 7, these 162 guns faced 386 aircraft. The mathematics alone told a devastating story. Commander Toshio Nakamura, the Yamato's chief gunnery officer, survived the sinking and gave detailed testimony during Allied interrogation on April 12, 1945, preserved in Addis Interrogation Report 498. Our anti-aircraft guns performed exactly as designed. We achieved hit rates consistent with our training standards. Approximately 3 to 4% of shells fired resulted in aircraft damage or kills. We shot down perhaps 10 aircraft, damaged 20 more. In training, this would have been considered excellent performance. But they sent nearly 400 planes. Even perfect performance wasn't enough. I watched my crews work with extraordinary discipline, following every procedure we had practiced for years. Loaders maintained ammunition flow despite the ship's increasing list. Gun captains tracked targets with precision even as explosions rocked the ship. They did everything right. It didn't matter. The Americans had simply brought more planes than our defense could handle. It wasn't a failure of courage or skill. It was a failure of our strategic assumptions about what quantity of force an enemy could bring to bear. The revelation of American industrial capacity came in waves, each more psychologically jarring than the last. According to fleet composition reports from Task Force 58, the American carrier force that launched the Yamato attack consisted of 11 fleet carriers and 6 light carriers, 17 ships capable of launching aircraft. The entire combined fleet of the Imperial Japanese Navy, by April 1945, possessed 4 operational carriers total, with fuel sufficient for perhaps one more major operation. Dr. James Henderson, a naval analyst attached to Admiral Mitcher's staff, maintained detailed notes that were later donated to the Naval War College archives. His entry from April 8, 1945 reveals the strategic imbalance. The Japanese committed their largest remaining surface combatant in a desperate gamble to reach Okinawa. We responded by launching more aircraft in a single strike than their entire remaining carrier force could deploy. The Yamato represented 4 years of Japanese shipbuilding effort, rare materials, skilled labor, resources they could never replace. We sank her in 2 hours with aircraft we could replace in 2 weeks. The industrial war was over before the shooting started. They just didn't know it yet. The abundance extended beyond mere numbers to capability. American torpedoes, the Mark 13 aerial torpedo used by Grumman Avenger aircraft, had undergone 3 years of intensive development after embarrassing early war failures. By 1945, these weapons featured magnetic acoustic fuses, improved guidance systems, and shaped charges specifically designed to maximize damage against heavily armored warships. The Mark 13 carried a 600-pound Torpex warhead, an explosive 50% more powerful than TNT. The weapon's guidance system allowed drops from as low as 50 feet at speeds up to 300 knots, giving defending ships minimal reaction time. Most devastating of all, American torpedo bombers had developed tactics to concentrate multiple hits on the same side of a target ship, creating cumulative flooding that overwhelmed damage control efforts. Ensign Watanabe, the anti-aircraft director officer who survived by swimming 4 hours before rescue by the destroyer Yukikase, recalled in a 1963 oral history interview preserved by the Japan Center for Asian Historical Records, "I watched the torpedo planes make their runs. They came in so low their propeller wash created visible wakes on the water. They dropped their weapons from perhaps 500 meters, so close our guns couldn't depress low enough to track them effectively. The torpedoes ran straight and true, leaving white tracks across the dark water like fingers of death pointing at our hull. No erratic paths like our own oxygen torpedoes sometimes ran. No premature explosions. Every weapon they dropped seemed to function perfectly. I remember thinking, they have mastered even the details we struggle with. How can we fight an enemy who has perfected everything while we improvise with failing systems?" The comparison extended to aircraft performance. American carrier aircraft in 1945, F-6F Hellcats, SB-2C Helldivers, TBF Avengers, represented the 4th or 5th generation of carrier-based designs. Each generation incorporated lessons from combat, improved engines, better armament, enhanced survivability features. Japanese carrier aircraft, by contrast, had seen minimal evolution since 1942. Fuel shortages, material scarcity, and the loss of experienced engineers had frozen Japanese aviation development while American aviation advanced at revolutionary pace. Beyond material, the tactical revelation. But material abundance was merely the most visible layer of revelation. Beneath it lay something more fundamentally challenging to Japanese naval doctrine, the American integration of intelligence, coordination, and adaptive tactics that transformed individual weapons into overwhelming system effects. The U.S. Navy's approach to carrier aviation represented a radical departure from Japanese naval culture. According to training documents from the Naval Air Training Command, preserved at the National Museum of Naval Aviation in Pensacola, Florida, American pilots trained in coordinated strike packages, multi-squadron formations where fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo planes operated as integrated units with specific, rehearsed roles. Fighter squadrons established air superiority by sweeping away defending fighters and suppressing anti-aircraft fire. Dive bomber squadrons attacked from high altitude to force defenders to split their attention between high and low threats. Torpedo squadrons exploited this split attention to make low-level attack runs with minimal interference. Each element made the others more effective through deliberate coordination. Japanese naval aviation, by contrast, emphasized individual skill and initiative. Pilots were expected to be exceptional warriors who would adapt to combat situations using their superior training and spiritual strength. The doctrine assumed that well-trained individuals would naturally coordinate through shared understanding of objectives and Bushido spirit. The result, as April 7 demonstrated with brutal clarity, was American coordination defeating Japanese individual excellence. Commander Blake's combat diary captures this tactical sophistication. Our fighter escort established air supremacy first, sweeping away the handful of Japanese CAP fighters in the opening minutes. With the sky clear, our bomber and torpedo squadrons executed rehearsed approach patterns. First wave focused on suppressing anti-aircraft fire, targeting director systems and gun positions with bombs and rockets. Second wave delivered the killing blows, coordinated torpedo attacks from both sides to prevent counter-flooding, bomb strikes on vital systems to prevent damage control. Third wave mopped up and assessed damage, calling in additional strikes on hardened targets that had survived initial waves. It was a ballet of violence, each element supporting the others. The Japanese fought as individuals, each gun crew, each damage control team doing their best in isolation. We fought as a system, every element amplifying every other element's effectiveness. This systematic approach extended to intelligence gathering and mission planning. According to records from the Combat Intelligence Center aboard USS Bunker Hill, preserved in Record Group 38 at the National Archives, American forces had tracked the Yamato's departure from Tokuyama Harbor through submarine reconnaissance, aerial photography, and intercepted radio communications. The submarine USS Hackleback had positioned itself near Tokuyama, photographing the Yamato through her periscope as the battleship departed. These photographs were radioed to Task Force 58, providing confirmation of the target's identity and departure timing. Scout planes from the carriers had tracked the Japanese formation throughout the night, using radar to maintain contact even in darkness. By dawn on April 7, American commanders knew the Yamato's exact position, course, speed, and composition of escorts. The resulting attack plan included detailed specifications: the Yamato's maximum speed, 27 knots, reduced to 22 knots by fuel limitations, her anti-aircraft blind spots, the location of her vital systems, optimal torpedo attack angles, even the timing of crew meal schedules to maximize the chance of catching damage control teams at reduced readiness. Nothing was left to chance. 1:35 p.m. List 35 degrees. Captain orders abandon ship for non-essential personnel. Capsizing appears inevitable. I do not understand how we reached this point. We followed every procedure. We fought with maximum effort. Where did we fail? The final transmission, sent at 2:05 p.m. by an unknown radio operator as the ship rolled beyond recovery angle, contained just 7 words that capture the complete collapse of Japanese naval mythology: Heaven's #1 mission has failed. Forgive us. What makes these transmissions psychologically devastating is not the record of physical destruction, but the progression from certainty to incomprehension. The Yamato's crew fought with extraordinary courage and discipline. They followed every procedure, executed every defense perfectly by their training standards. Gun crews maintained fire discipline even as the ship listed so severely that shells rolled out of loading trays. Damage control teams worked until water rising through passageways drowned them at their stations. The ship's captain, Rear Admiral Kosaku Oruga, went down with his ship after refusing orders to abandon, maintaining his post on the bridge until the end. None of this courage, none of this discipline, none of this sacrifice mattered against an enemy who had developed tactics specifically designed to render Japanese defenses irrelevant. Warrant Officer Shigeo Yamada, a main battery fire control technician who survived by jumping from the capsizing ship at 2:15 p.m., gave testimony that was recorded in the diary of Captain Tamichi Hara of the destroyer Futsuki and later published in Hara's memoir Japanese Destroyer Captain. I climbed down from the fire control tower and watched my shipmates maintaining their stations even as the ship rolled past 45 degrees. Gunners still at their weapons though they could no longer aim them. Engineers still at their posts though water was rising to their chests. Nobody panicked. Nobody abandoned their duty until ordered. I felt immense pride in their discipline. And simultaneous despair, because I knew their discipline was worthless against what we faced. We had been taught that Japanese spirit and training could overcome any material disadvantage. That day proved this was a lie. American material advantage, combined with superior tactics and better coordination, made our spirit irrelevant. This was the most devastating revelation, not that we were defeated, but that the principles we had built our entire naval philosophy upon were fundamentally wrong. The first cracks in doctrine. By 2:23 p.m., when the Yamato finally capsized and exploded, her magazines detonating in a fireball visible for 60 miles, sending a mushroom cloud 7,000 feet into the air, the 269 survivors scattered across the East China Sea faced an unexpected crisis beyond mere physical survival. They had witnessed the destruction of the Imperial Navy's ultimate symbol of invincibility in less time than it took to watch a movie. They had watched American air power destroy in 2 hours what Japanese industry had spent 3 years creating, consuming resources equivalent to building 30 destroyers. The Yamato had been sold to the Japanese public as proof of their nation's technological superiority, evidence that Japanese engineering and fighting spirit could overcome American industrial mass production. Now she lay on the bottom of the East China Sea in 1,120 feet of water, along with 2,498 of her crew. For the survivors, this catastrophe posed profound questions that went beyond tactical analysis or strategic assessment. If the Yamato, the unsinkable symbol of Japanese naval might, could be destroyed with such apparent ease, what did that say about everything they had been taught? What did it say about the war itself? Captain Tamichi Hara, commanding the destroyer Futsuki, which rescued 67 survivors, recorded in his memoir his conversation with a rescued Yamato ensign pulled from the water at 4:17 p.m. The young man, perhaps 22 years old, sat wrapped in a blanket on my deck, shivering despite the warm April afternoon. His eyes had the 1,000-yard stare I had seen in veterans of Guadalcanal and Saipan. He said to me, "Captain, they told us the Yamato could not sink. They told us American pilots were poorly trained and cowardly. They told us one battleship was worth 50 aircraft. They showed us training films where American formations broke apart under anti-aircraft fire. Everything they told us was wrong. I watched Americans maintain perfect formation while our guns tore through their ranks. I watched them coordinate hundreds of aircraft like a symphony orchestra. I watched them destroy the mightiest battleship ever built in less time than a training exercise. If they lied about this, if everything we based our tactics and our confidence upon was lies, what else have they lied about? How can we fight a war when our leaders don't tell us the truth about our enemy?" The survivors who reached Japan in the days following the sinking carried knowledge more dangerous than any military secret, the truth about American capabilities, and the magnitude of Japanese strategic delusion. They had seen firsthand the gap between propaganda and reality, between what Japanese military leadership claimed about American weakness and what American forces actually demonstrated in combat. But the revelation extended beyond just tactical or technical matters. The destruction of the Yamato represented the collapse of a mythology that had sustained Japanese naval warfare for decades, the belief that spirit and determination could overcome material disadvantage, that superior training and discipline could defeat superior numbers, that Japanese warriors were inherently superior to their Western opponents. The revelation had occurred. The myth of the unsinkable fortress had been demolished in the most spectacular fashion possible, witnessed by hundreds of surviving crew members, recorded by American combat cameras, documented in thousands of pages of reports and testimonies. But the full consequences of this destruction, for these survivors, for the Imperial Navy, for Japan's ability to continue the war, had yet to unfold. The Yamato had sunk. But the more devastating collapse, the sinking of Japanese naval confidence, the destruction of institutional delusions, the exposure of propaganda lies, was only beginning. Among the 269 survivors floating in the oil-slicked waters that afternoon, a quiet understanding began to form. Petty Officer Tanaka, clinging to debris alongside 3 shipmates, spoke words that would be repeated in survivor testimonies for decades. "We did not lose because we lacked courage. We lost because we believed lies about our enemy. The Americans did not defeat the Yamato with superior spirit. They defeated us with superior truth, accurate intelligence, realistic tactics, honest assessment of capabilities. While we built our strategy on mythology and propaganda, they built theirs on engineering and facts. This realization, born in the waters of the East China Sea on April 7, 1945, would prove more destructive to Japanese military morale than the loss of the ship itself. The survivors carried home not just the grief of defeat, but the corrosive knowledge that their defeat had been inevitable, that the Yamato had sailed into battle already beaten by an enemy who understood warfare better than Japan's own military leadership understood it. The truth had been revealed. Now came the reckoning.